The avoidant has maintained complete distance since the relationship ended or since their last major withdrawal that damaged the connection beyond what previous cycles had achieved. This distance creates the appearance of indifference, suggesting they have moved on easily. It communicates they feel no remorse about their patterns or about the pain those patterns caused you. You interpret this distance as confirmation that they never truly cared, that you were easily discarded, that their defended position means they can walk away without looking back, without guilt, without any emotional consequence for having hurt someone who loved them and tried to make the relationship work despite their limitations. The distance feels like the final insult after an extended period of inadequate presence. Not only did they fail to show up adequately during the relationship, but they cannot even demonstrate basic accountability or remorse after the relationship has ended, cannot reach out to acknowledge the harm they caused, cannot offer any closure or recognition of what you endured trying to love someone so defended. Yet beneath the appearance of indifferent distance exists an entirely different psychological reality that the avoidance, shame, and self-judgment prevent them from revealing or acting upon. The avoidant is maintaining distance not because they do not care about you or feel unbothered by having hurt you, but rather because they care enough to feel profound shame about their patterns and their impact on you. Because they recognize at some level that they harmed someone who deserved better treatment, because facing you would require confronting the evidence of pain they caused and accountability they struggle to offer. The distance represents the avoidance attempt to protect you from further harm by removing themselves from your life. It reflects their belief that you deserve better than what they demonstrated they can provide. It stems from their conviction that reaching out would be a selfish imposition on someone they already hurt too much. The avoidant wants reconnection, wants to know you are okay, wants to express remorse and to possibly restore some form of contact. Yet their shame about their patterns, their belief that you could not possibly want to hear from them after what they did, their fear of facing your justified anger or pain, their conviction that staying away is the right thing to do despite it not being what they want, all combine to keep them locked in distance that increases rather than decreases their suffering. This distance is not the comfortable defended position the avoidant maintained during the relationship where withdrawal served their anxiety regulation and their defended comfort. This distance is a punishing exile the avoidant imposes on themselves because they believe they do not deserve access to you, because they cannot face the harm they caused, because they have concluded that the loving thing to do is to stay away, even though staying away conflicts with their desire for connection and their attachment to you that persists despite the relationship's ending. Understanding this motivation for their distance does not obligate you to reach out. It does not mean you should rescue them from their self-imposed exile. It does not make their patterns acceptable or mean you should give them another chance. It simply provides an accurate understanding of what drives their behavior so you can make informed decisions about your own path forward. The distance is driven by shame about their patterns, not by lack of care. The avoidant has developed sufficient self-awareness through the relationship's progression, and especially through its ending, to recognize at some level that their patterns harmed you, that their defended limitations caused legitimate pain to someone who invested genuinely in building a relationship with them, that their behavior fell substantially short of what adequate partnership requires and what you specifically deserved. This recognition generates profound shame, not the healthy guilt that motivates repair and behavioral change, but rather the toxic shame that convinces the avoidant they are fundamentally flawed, that they are a person who hurts people they care about, that they lack the capacity to be an adequate partner, and therefore should remove themselves from situations where their inadequacy can cause further harm. The shame emerges through accumulated awareness of specific ways their patterns affected you. The avoidant remembers moments when you expressed hurt and they responded with defensiveness or withdrawal rather than with care. They recall times when you needed support, and they were unavailable because their defended comfort took precedence. They recognize a pattern of disappointing you repeatedly, of failing to show up when you needed them, of withdrawing exactly when deeper intimacy became possible. They face that you accommodated their limitations extensively while they provided minimal reciprocation, that you remained patient through cycles of withdrawal and return that any reasonable person would have ended far sooner, that you loved them more generously than their defended position allowed them to receive or reciprocate adequately. This accumulated awareness creates shame that manifests as a conviction that they are a bad person, an inadequate partner, someone who damages people who get close to them. The shame differs from healthy guilt that would motivate them to make amends, to do repair work, to change their patterns. Instead, the toxic shame convinces them they are irredeemably flawed, that their patterns reflect fundamental inadequacy rather than learned defensive behaviors they could modify through intentional work. The shame tells them that you are better off without them, that they would only continue hurting you if they remained in your life, that the loving choice is to stay away even though staying away contradicts their desire for connection with you. The shame-based distance serves multiple psychological functions for the avoidant. First, it protects their already fragile self-concept from further damage that facing you would create. If they contacted you, they would risk encountering your anger or your pain about how they treated you, responses that would confirm their shame-based belief that they are a bad person who harms others. They would risk your rejection if you established a boundary that you do not want contact with them. Rejection that would reinforce their core wound that being truly known leads to being found inadequate and abandoned. They would risk having to articulate accountability and remorse that their defended structure struggles to express. Communication that would require vulnerability about their limitations that shame makes feel impossible. Maintaining distance protects them from all these feared outcomes by ensuring they never have to face direct evidence of the harm they caused or direct rejection in response to that harm. Second, the shame-based distance allows the avoidant to maintain some positive sense of self through the narrative that they are doing the right thing by staying away. The avoidant can tell themselves they are being considerate of your well-being by not imposing their presence on you, that they are demonstrating respect for your need to heal by maintaining distance, that they are protecting you from further harm by removing themselves from your life. This narrative transforms their defended withdrawal into something that feels like care rather than like abandonment, something that allows them to maintain that they are acting in your best interest rather than facing that their distance serves their own defended comfort by allowing them to avoid accountability and vulnerability that contact would require. Third, the shame-based distance eliminates the immediate discomfort of facing consequences of their patterns while maintaining the long-term suffering that the shame generates. The avoidant avoids the acute distress of seeing your hurt or anger, of articulating remorse and accountability, of risking your rejection or your continued engagement that would require sustained vulnerability. Yet they live with the chronic distress of separation from someone they care about, ongoing shame about their patterns, and persistent wonder about whether you have moved on or might want to hear from them. The avoidant chooses the familiar chronic suffering of distance over the unfamiliar acute vulnerability of facing you, a pattern consistent with their defended position throughout the relationship where they avoided acute discomfort of intimacy through withdrawal that created chronic disconnection. The shame-based distance also reflects the avoidance pattern of extreme thinking, where they move from seeing themselves as adequate during the relationship to seeing themselves as completely inadequate after recognizing their pattern's impact. The avoidant lacks the capacity for an integrated self-concept that holds both their genuine care for you and their defended limitations that harmed you, both their legitimate struggles with intimacy and their responsibility for how those struggles affected you. Instead, they swing between defensive positions where they are fine and you are too demanding to shame-based positions where they are terrible and you deserve far better. The current distance reflects them being stuck in the shame position where they cannot hold the complexity that they are an imperfect person who made mistakes and caused harm, and who also has the capacity to take accountability and to work on their patterns. Understanding that distance is driven by shame rather than by indifference requires recognizing that the avoidant cares enough to feel terrible about their patterns. Yet their caring manifests through withdrawal rather than through repair, because their defensive structure and their shame convinces them that staying away serves you better than facing the vulnerability that reconnection and repair would require. The avoidant is not comfortable in this distance. They are suffering in it, yet they believe the suffering is deserved punishment for their patterns, and that maintaining the distance, despite their suffering, demonstrates their care for you by protecting you from a person who has already hurt you too much. The distance reflects not a lack of feeling, but rather feelings they lack the capacity to express or act upon in ways that would serve repair, because their shame and their defended limitations prevent them from taking the vulnerable steps that making amends would require. They believe you deserve better than what they demonstrated they can provide. The avoidant has reached recognition through the relationship's ending that they could not meet your needs adequately, that their defended limitations prevented them from providing the consistency, emotional availability, and genuine intimacy that you deserved and that a healthy relationship requires. This recognition creates the conviction that you deserve a partner who can show up fully in ways they demonstrated they cannot, that you should not settle for their defended inadequacy when better options exist, that the most loving thing they can do is release you completely to find partnership that meets your needs rather than keeping you engaged with their insufficient presence. The avoidant maintains distance based on this conviction that you deserve better, believing that staying away constitutes a gift that frees you to find an adequate partner, rather than recognizing that their unilateral decision to maintain distance without communication continues the pattern of them making choices about the relationship without your input or consent. This conviction that you deserve better emerges from the avoidant's accumulated awareness of the gap between what you needed and what they provided. They recognize you needed consistent presence, and they provided sporadic availability, interrupted by withdrawal. They acknowledge you needed emotional intimacy, and they maintained defended distance that prevented genuine vulnerability. They understand you needed someone who could work through conflict constructively, and they responded to discord with avoidance or defensiveness. They see you needed partnership where both parties invest equitably, and they provided minimal reciprocation while you carried the majority of relational work. This gap between your reasonable needs and their inadequate provision creates recognition that they were not an adequate partner for you, that you sacrificed your own well-being accommodating their limitations, that you settled for far less than you deserved. The conviction that you deserve better reflects some positive growth for the avoidant. It demonstrates they have moved beyond the defensive position where they blamed you for having excessive needs or characterized your hurt as your emotional problem. They now recognize that your needs were reasonable and that their inability to meet those needs reflects their limitations rather than your inadequacy. Yet this recognition manifests in a self-flagellating way that focuses on their inadequacy rather than on taking responsibility for attempting to develop the capacity they lacked. Rather than concluding, I was an inadequate partner and need to work on my patterns so I can show up better in future relationships, the avoidant concludes, I am an inadequate person who cannot be a good partner and therefore should stay away from people who deserve better. The belief that you deserve better serves a defensive function by allowing the avoidant to avoid the vulnerability of attempting repair or of working on their patterns. If they maintain the conviction that you deserve someone better than them, they eliminate the possibility of attempting reconciliation that would require them to demonstrate genuine, sustained change and to risk that their changed behavior still might not be sufficient. If they position themselves as the wrong person for you, they avoid having to become the right person through uncomfortable developmental work. If they maintain that staying away is a gift to you, they transform their defended withdrawal into something that feels generous rather than facing that their distance continues the pattern of prioritizing their defended comfort over engaging vulnerably with you. The conviction also reflects the avoidance tendency toward black and white thinking about adequacy, where they can be either a perfect partner or a terrible partner with no middle ground. The avoidant recognizes they were not the perfect partner. They harmed you through their patterns, failed to meet your needs adequately, fell short of what you deserved, rather than holding the more nuanced truth that they are an imperfect person with both limitations and capacity for growth, a person who made mistakes and who could take accountability and work to do better. The avoidance swings to the opposite extreme of seeing themselves as a terrible partner who has nothing to offer and who should remove themselves entirely. This extreme thinking prevents them from taking the middle path of acknowledging their inadequacy while working to develop greater capacity. The distance based on believing you deserve better also serves to protect the avoidant from the risk of trying and failing. If they reached out to express remorse, to attempt repair, to see whether you might be open to their demonstrating changed behavior, they would risk that you reject them definitively, telling them you have moved on, establishing a firm boundary that you do not want contact with them, communicating that their patterns cause too much harm for you to consider giving them another opportunity. This rejection would be devastating because it would confirm their fear that they destroyed the possibility of a relationship with you through their patterns. Maintaining distance based on the conviction that you deserve better protects them from facing this potential rejection by framing their absence as their choice rather than as a consequence of your rejection. The avoidant may also maintain distance based on the belief you deserve better as a way of managing their own attachment pain. Staying away while telling themselves it is a gift to you allows them to maintain some sense of noble self-sacrifice rather than facing that they lost you through their own patterns and that this loss creates pain they struggle to manage. The narrative that they are staying away for your benefit protects them from fully experiencing grief and regret about losing you by transforming that loss into something chosen rather than into a consequence they could have prevented through different behavior. Understanding that the avoidant maintains distance because they believe you deserve better requires recognizing this reflects both genuine recognition of their inadequacy and defended avoidance of the vulnerability that attempting repair would require. The avoidant is not wrong that you deserve better than what they provided. You do deserve a partner who can meet your needs consistently, who can provide emotional intimacy, who can work through difficulties rather than withdrawing. Yet, their unilateral decision to stay away based on this belief continues their pattern of making relationship decisions without your input, continues prioritizing their defended comfort over vulnerable engagement with you, and continues avoiding the accountability and change work that demonstrating they could eventually become better partners would require. The distance protects them from risk and vulnerability while they frame it as protecting you from their inadequacy. The distance protects them from facing your pain that they caused. The avoidant maintains distance partly because facing you would require confronting direct evidence of the pain their patterns caused, would force them to witness the hurt they generated through their defended limitations, would demand they sit with your suffering that resulted from their inability to show up adequately throughout the relationship. This confrontation with the consequences of their behavior represents exactly what the avoidance defensive structure organized to avoid. Being held accountable for how their defended position affects others, facing that their patterns harm people they care about, experiencing the guilt and discomfort that witnessing another's legitimate pain about their behavior generates. Maintaining distance allows the avoidant to avoid this confrontation while living with an abstract awareness of having hurt you rather than facing the concrete reality of your pain. The avoidant knows at an intellectual level that they hurt you through their patterns. They understand logically that their withdrawal created pain, that their defended limitations left your needs unmet, that their inability to provide consistency generated insecurity and suffering. Yet intellectual knowledge of having caused harm differs substantially from directly witnessing the pain someone experiences because of your behavior. Maintaining distance allows the avoidant to hold intellectual awareness while avoiding the visceral, emotional experience of seeing your hurt, hearing your pain, facing the reality of suffering they caused. The distance creates a protective buffer between their abstract knowledge and the concrete reality that facing you would force them to encounter. If the avoidant contacted you or responded to your contact, they would risk encountering expressions of your pain that would be difficult to defend against or minimize. You might express hurt about specific ways they failed you, anger about patterns that harmed you repeatedly, grief about a relationship that could not work because of their limitations. These expressions would require the avoidant to witness the emotional impact of their behavior rather than maintaining defended distance where they can avoid direct confrontation with the consequences of their patterns. The avoidant's defensive structure has a limited capacity to sit with another's pain, especially when they bear responsibility for that pain. Their usual response involves minimizing, deflecting, or withdrawing. Maintaining distance eliminates the need to deploy these inadequate responses by ensuring they never encounter your pain directly. The protection from facing your pain also shields the avoidant from having to offer the emotional accountability and vulnerability that witnessing your pain would demand. If they saw or heard your hurt directly, social and emotional expectations would require them to acknowledge that hurt, to express remorse, to take responsibility for their role in creating your suffering. These responses require vulnerability. The avoidance defended structure resists admitting fault, expressing genuine remorse, and sitting with uncomfortable emotions without defensive escape. Maintaining distance allows them to avoid these vulnerability requirements by ensuring a situation never arises where such responses would be expected or appropriate. The avoidant also protects themselves through distance from the guilt that directly witnessing your pain would generate. Abstract knowledge that they hurt you creates manageable discomfort. Concrete experience of seeing your suffering because of their behavior would create intense guilt that might overwhelm their capacity to manage without defensive shutdown. The avoidant lacks a well-developed capacity to sit with guilt, to use guilt productively as motivation for repair and change, to hold themselves accountable while maintaining an integrated self-concept. Instead, guilt threatens to activate their shame and their sense of being a fundamentally bad person. Maintaining distance protects them from the guilt that witnessing your pain would generate by keeping your suffering abstract rather than viscerally real. The distance also protects the avoidant from facing the specific ways they failed you that seeing you would make undeniable. In absence, the avoidant can maintain a somewhat vague awareness that they were an inadequate partner. Facing you would force confrontation with specific incidents, times they withdrew when you needed them, moments they responded to your vulnerability with defensiveness, occasions when they prioritized their comfort over your legitimate needs. The specificity would make their patterns' impact undeniable in ways that maintaining distance allows them to keep somewhat abstract. The avoidant can live with a general sense they were not a good partner more easily than they could live with specific memories of your face when they disappointed you, your voice when you expressed hurt they caused, your tears when their patterns became unbearable. The protective function of distance particularly serves the avoidant if they have not done genuine work on their patterns since the relationship ended. Facing you would potentially reveal that they remain unchanged, that the lessons they might claim to have learned have not translated into actual behavioral capacity, that they still lack the ability to show up differently. This revelation would be painful because it would confirm that their patterns are more entrenched than they hoped, that their limitations are more profound than they wanted to acknowledge. Maintaining distance allows them to preserve the possibility that they could be different if given another chance, while avoiding the test that would reveal whether they have actually developed different capacity. Understanding that distance protects the avoidant from facing your pain requires recognizing that avoiding your suffering serves their defended comfort while continuing the pattern of prioritizing their well-being over engagement with the consequences of their behavior. The avoidant is choosing to avoid the discomfort of witnessing pain they caused rather than choosing the vulnerability of facing that pain and taking accountability for their role in creating it. The distance reflects a continuation of the pattern where their need to avoid discomfort takes precedence over doing the difficult emotional work that taking genuine responsibility would require. While the avoidant may frame distance as protecting you, it more accurately protects them from having to face what they did and from having to demonstrate the accountability and remorse that facing you would demand. They want reconnection but can't imagine you'd accept them after what they did. The avoidant experiences an ongoing desire for reconnection with you. They think about you regularly, miss your presence in their life, feel impulses to reach out to express remorse, or to see whether possibility exists for restored contact. This desire for reconnection reflects a genuine attachment to you that persists despite the relationship's ending, reflects that they valued what you provided and who you are in ways their defended position prevented them from adequately expressing during the relationship. Yet alongside this desire exists a powerful conviction that you could not possibly want to hear from them after how they treated you, that any attempt to reach out would be an unwelcome intrusion that would hurt you further, that they destroyed all possibility of reconnection through their patterns and therefore should respect your presumed desire for permanent distance. This conviction that you would not accept contact from them emerges from the avoidant's projection of their own self-judgment onto you. The avoidant believes they were a terrible partner, that they caused substantial harm through their patterns, that they failed you in ways that any reasonable person would consider unforgivable. They assume you must see them as they see themselves, as a person who hurt you badly, who does not deserve your forgiveness or another chance, who you are better off without. This projection means the avoidant attributes to you rejection and judgment that may not reflect your actual feelings, but rather reflects their own harsh self-assessment. They cannot imagine you would want to hear from them because they cannot imagine why you would want connection with someone who was as inadequate as they believe they were. The conviction that you would not accept contact also reflects the avoidance difficulty understanding that people can hold complexity, that you might simultaneously feel hurt about their patterns and care about them, might recognize the relationship could not continue while remaining open to some form of communication, might need distance for your healing while not requiring permanent disconnection. The avoidance black and white thinking leads them to assume that because they hurt you, you must completely reject them. Because the relationship ended, you must want nothing to do with them. Because they were an inadequate partner, you must view them as a person not worth any form of contact. This extreme thinking prevents them from considering that you might hold a more nuanced position where some form of reconnection could be possible even after the relationship has ended. The avoidant also fears that reaching out would constitute a selfish act that prioritizes their desire for connection over your need for healing. They tell themselves that contacting you would be about serving their needs, their desire to alleviate guilt through apology, their wish to know you are okay, their hope for some form of forgiveness or closure, rather than being about serving you. This framing positions reaching out as inherently selfish in position, regardless of the content or intentions of potential contact. The avoidant concludes that the unselfish choice is to maintain distance, even though that distance conflicts with their desire for reconnection, believing that what they want should be irrelevant compared to what they believe you need.